Okay, councillors, welcome. Can we move through to the component of our budget update? And Mr. Taylor, you leading this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief update from me. We're coming to the end of the annual plan process, as councillors know, with your deliberations meeting coming up in May. So just a brief update paper from me, giving some financial context for the discussions you're about to have in the wider annual plan workshop. The one clear thing, as we discussed at this morning's meeting, there are still some unknowns. So as we build the budget and get closer and closer, we're locking some of those down. CPI was a good example of that, and the discussion around it being set at 6.9%. We did assume 6% before that figure came out when these papers were prepared. So we know it's higher, 0.9%, nearly 1% higher than that forecast that we built into these figures. And as you know, if we set a general rates increase anything less than the CPI increase, we're potentially storing up an issue for later. So the sustainability of any rates increase below that amount, council need to consider that carefully. And already, as highlighted at previous annual plan workshop, council are supporting a lower general rates increase by using reserves, using our regional fund reserve. And at the moment, we're forecasting using 7 million regional fund reserves in the next financial year. So that's just some of the financial context for councillors to consider when they go into the annual plan workshop, and the discussion on the items still to come. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions, Mr. Taylor? Right, move on. Siobhan, is it? Graham coming up? Siobhan?
He's back up. Okay.
Come up front, Graham.
He was here in case I got sick.
Right, off you go.
So just to reiterate, this is our fourth workshop for the annual plan, and our focus for today is the updates, including the budget update that you just heard from Matt Taylor, as well as a summary of decisions that you have made over the course of the last sort of 12 to 18 months, as well as requesting some guidance on a couple of proposals for increased expenditure. And following today's meeting, the next annual plan related formal meetings will be hearings on the aligned policies and procedures, as well as deliberations, which will be on 18th of May. So you will have in your pack a short paper which is designed to summarise key decisions and guidance that you have provided over the last 12 to 18 months in relation to the long-term plan and the annual plan. And that has occurred over 6 meetings and workshops, which include this one. And the purpose of this paper primarily was to indicate the story so far, i.e. how we've got to the budget situation, this level of service situation we are at today. And I guess simply serve as a sort of an aid memoir for you in your decision making today and at deliberations on the 18th of May. So that concludes mine. If we have any questions relating to the paper on decisions and implications.
Floor's open, councillors. I think the issues in terms of the process is pretty well set out in these papers. Right, continue.
Thank you. So the next paper covers financial efficiencies and savings achieved by council. Now you will recall that during the preparation of the long-term plan, you were briefed on efficiencies achieved in a number of specified areas. Again, that is summarised in the paper you have. In the current financial year, against those same categories that you received a briefing on for the long-term plan, we're anticipating approximately $2 million in savings underspends forecast against budget. We've noted in the papers some of the examples of these recent efficiency focused projects, and if you have any questions or comments about any of these, myself or the general managers or the chief executive can provide further information on those.
So, Mr. Chair, are we making savings on public transport where we are running the weekend service?
Executive.
Through you, Chair, we're currently negotiating with NZ Bus in regards to the savings. You'll recall that we recently made significant savings with that network refresh, but at the moment we're having negotiations, and I can update you. The issue with the weekend service was that initially with Omicron, it was fixed costs, but at the moment we are negotiating. Given the extension of the weekend service that is required, because it's now moved into workforce issues for NZ Bus. Like all bus companies in New Zealand, they're struggling to get bus drivers, hence why we are negotiating.
So question from me, Fiona, Karen's up there, sorry. In layman's terms, what does enhanced human resource support to meet evolving workspace needs mean?
That's a good question. It's a reflection of the increased workload, I guess, of certain roles within the people and capability team. And so it's to respond to an increase in workload, but also anticipated increase in workload with the challenges in trying to attract and retain key talent.
Yeah.
I can also add to that. One of the focus areas we have is on leadership within the Regional Council and providing pathways for leadership, but being really strong in terms of the people leaders in this organisation. And that was well demonstrated in terms of how we responded to COVID. What Karen is also talking about is having what we call some raw leadership bench strength, so that when we do have staff away on leave, that we can bring in leaders who are aspiring to have permanent leadership roles into those positions. So we really are focused on improving the capability and capacity of our leaders in this organisation and growing new leaders.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. One could expect that we had some reduced costs as a result of not being able to deliver our work program during COVID restrictions. So how much of these efficiencies, so-called efficiencies, are actually efficiencies, i.e. delivering the same level of service at a lower cost? And how much are we've had to have a reduced level of service because of COVID and therefore we've saved money?
I can answer that. It is a complex question you're asking, Councillor Nees, because on the one hand, we continue to build our essential service delivery throughout COVID. But on the other hand, we've changed how we're working. So we've had more people working from home, and we've certainly had less travel over recent months. We expect some of those savings to be locked in because we are changing and looking at more flexible workplaces. So COVID has really accelerated how we are working and how people can be more flexible in this workspace. A key benefit of that, of course, is that we won't increase our footprint in terms of increasing staff numbers through these deliverability reviews because we're using our assets better. I do expect some of those, particularly those travel costs, to be maintained in those savings. And it is a reflection of COVID, but also how we've changed how we're working.
Question?
Mr. Clark.
Yeah, Karen, really, I mean, we've been through an amazing period of time with COVID, people working from home and adjustment. In terms of, I'm not sure how you measure efficiencies. I'm sure there's been pros and cons, but overall, what has been the impact of so many people working from home in terms of efficiencies, lifestyle choices, city? I mean, do we do an analysis of all that? I mean, I've had some amazing conversations with people outside of this forum who just love it and don't want to go back to the office because they get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, by 8 o'clock, it's all done. They go with the kids, so they're bloody marvellous. Anyway, that's by the by. Yeah, measurables, that how do we go?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can appreciate, there are many, many components, but I'll highlight a few of the ones that we have focused on and that we found in our experience. So COVID has undoubtedly moved the world on in terms of flexible working, and has removed some of those barriers that potentially we had before in terms of some of that hesitation. The way that we see it and what the research backs up is that there's a balance. So we tend to work on the basis of kind of half and half, and our policy is 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. That's in non-COVID times. Of course, we're being more flexible than that at the moment. And what that allows for is it allows the staff to come into the office, connect. It allows for that team connection and collaboration, but it also allows the staff to have some time at home, and absolutely staff love that. But it is about having a balance so that the organisation can still benefit, the teams can still benefit, and the individuals can still benefit. So we tend to call it the sweet spot in the middle.
And measurables?
In terms of?
Well, I suppose it's got to be, if you have an efficiency chart,
Yeah.
there must be measurables in it.
Yeah.
I mean, are people, when you give somebody a job in the office that takes 2 days,
Yeah.
where they go home and they get it done in a day, is that efficient? Or, I mean, do you actually have, it's just an interesting sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the research does say that when people have more balance and they can choose the type of work they do in the different environments that they've got to do, that they are more productive. It's tricky to measure it in terms of across so many different staff doing so many different functions, but absolutely, we survey our staff and we ask them that question, and this is the feedback that we get, that they're a lot more productive when they can choose, if they've got a piece of work that they need to do where they need some quiet time to be able to think, and they do that at home. They've got a piece of work that they need to do and they seek others' feedback and views, a more collaborative approach, and they do that in the office.
A question to you, Karen, as well as Fiona. You make a lot of commentary about the culture in the organisation, but inevitably across the sector and the government sector, how are you finding the recruitment issue in terms of some of these key positions?
Absolutely. So this is something that we're watching very, very closely, as you can imagine. And currently within our organisation, although we are starting to see our turnover start to increase a little bit, we're behind the trends in what sense of what we're seeing within other organisations. And we absolutely put that down to our culture, our employer brand, and the reputation that we've got across the sector, across New Zealand. We are obviously watching it, and what we know is that when people leave our organisation, they typically leave for career opportunities. And so what we're trying to think about is how we can create ways and means of retaining those staff. Our turnover is still at a really acceptable level. It's between 10 and 11% at the moment. And that's what you would call optimal, because you need an amount of turnover to be able to keep those good staff in roles where they promoted to. So yes, in terms of culture, all of our feedback from staff through Rescue Team, etc., tells us that we're doing all the right things and all the component parts in terms of how you retain your staff. We're doing really well. So yes, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Anything else, councillors? Oh, Councillor McDonald.
Just when we're talking about working from home for staff, do you think moving into the future that will actually become an attraction for staff and having that ability to work from home, and how would that then impact on how the regional council will look at that long term? That's my first question. And my second question is, if that were the case, would we need to revisit the necessity of us having such brand buildings like this here, Whakatane and Rotorua? I mean, what would be the point of having them if we move to the point of having a large number of staff working from home long term?
It's a really interesting question, and it's a conversation that we've been having within the team ourselves at the moment. I'd say we're keeping a watching brief on this at the moment, and we're talking with our people and seeing what's important for us as an organisation. At the moment, our staff are telling us that it is important for them to connect with their team and to maintain the culture that we've got. You know, we're like one large whānau really, and people really like that, and that's part of the attraction as to why people come here. However, some organisations and some of our competitors are absolutely saying that you can work from home. And so that is potentially for some people an attraction. And so we are cognizant of that. And we are keeping a watching brief on that. At the moment, what we're seeing in the industry is, or the talk in the HR sector is that some organisations who've made that jump way too quickly have lost the culture that they spent many, many years building up. And there are some really big names that have done that, and they've therefore, and to come on to your second question, they've moved away from having expensive offices in Auckland, for example, but it's been to the detriment of their culture, and they're now having to scramble to kind of go, right, well, who are we again, and what's the culture that we want? So I think it's a step that we would take cautiously. We also have some identified areas where we've got significant skill shortages. So it may well be that we ring fence some areas where we need to be more flexible because of the skill shortages in those talent areas. And we, on balance, hope that might be the right strategy for there. So it's a conversation that we're actively having, and we're watching the move within the country at the moment.
Councillor Daddleson.
So just let me understand, to keep your team culture going, are you meaning that when someone works from home 2 days a week, that all of that team does the same, or are they so teams, different teams go having different days off so that you keep your team culture, or is it very ad lib?
Yeah, so each people leader, each manager really manages that with their team, depending on what is important to that team. So just recently I was in a presentation where one manager, they called it anchor days. So they have 2 anchor days where all of the team come in, and so that they get that team collaboration. Other managers do it through certain meetings that they request to have on a face-to-face basis. So we're really letting the leaders lead with this and say what's right for their teams, but with the overarching principle that it's important to us as an organisation that we come together as teams.
Through you, Chair, can I also add, we have many services that need to come into the office. So a good example is our laboratory service in Whakatane. So even in lockdown level 4, we have staff in the offices because of the nature of their work. It's fair to say that we are not seeking to increase our footprint, our office footprint, because we can be more flexible in terms of how people work in the office and work from home. Over the last few months, though, it's increasingly clear that the staff at the Regional Council really enjoy connecting. They really enjoy meeting face to face, and many of the projects that they work on is across teams. So over recent weeks, there is real joy in the offices in terms of people who have been at home coming together and seeing each other. I was in the Whakatane office last week, and there were 2 scientists who happened to be in there who hadn't seen each other for 6 weeks. They were absolutely ecstatic to be working together again, face to face. And it was just an example of what we have been missing out because of the COVID environment.
So, move on. So we're on to the draft annual plan expenditure.
Yes. So the first proposal for discussion today relates to the local government election. Sorry.
So we're up to page 15, councillors, on your hard copy. So it's about proposals for increased expenditure.
So the first proposal relates to the local government elections with 2 main cost drivers. 1, the DHU's merging into a national health service, and 2, the decision to extend the commissioners means that where costs were shared historically, they will now largely rest upon regional council shoulders. So the guidance sought today relates to whether or not to include an additional amount of operational expenditure in the draft budget, which will be funded through general rates.
Mr. Love.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. You've got no option but to do this, so I suggest we just crack on and agree that it's necessary.
Any differing opinion?
Can we spread the cost?
Mr. Brunning, so I think some prior discussion is the request from councillors to approach DIA. They made the decision in terms of appointing commissioners, so maybe they should stand in the market and meet some of the unintended consequences of that.
Things might fly. Any chance of spreading this over a 3-year period?
Normally, we look at those costs in the year that they fall, but we'll have a look at that and bring you back to annual plan deliberations if that's possible.
Sorry. Oh, Councillor Nees.
Oh, thank you. Yes, there's a mix of figures in the report. In the table on page 16, we have 256,000 as the increased funding. This was double checking that it is the 285,350 that we're looking at increasing.
I think, and so whilst they're looking up the figures, Graham, I think there's a combination there because DHB's moved out of this as well.
Page 16 says 256. Page 18 says 285.
Apologies, our point is incorrect, so it is the 285 figure.
It is 285. Okay, I support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane, for that. So consensus clearly is that this is a little choice in doing this, and I'll leave it up to Chief Executive or staff to approach DIA in terms of contribution. It's unbudgeted, wasn't it? And the current expectation is you'll get this out of Mr. Ingham's budget. Is that right?
We will come back to you in terms of deliberations. That's right.
That's what I was
This
asking.
is from general funds.
Yeah, general funds. Okay, next one.
The next investment proposal, relates to the Regional Safety and Rescue Services Fund. So initially, under the LTP, budgeted for 400,000 in RSRS funding per year. That available funding has been allocated via an existing funding round, and CDMG have requested that Bob RC consider allocating an additional amount. Graham, would you like to?
Yes, so we had a funding round for this scheme earlier on this year. We're allocating funds for the next 2 financial years. And so the 400,000, which is included in the budget, has been fully allocated, and CDMG have recommended additional $50,000 per annum to support some of those organisations a bit more. It is outlined in the table included in the report. Essentially, the bulk of it would be providing some additional funding to Coast Guard New Zealand, and also some additional support for USAR and a small amount, additional amount for Surf Life Saving New Zealand as well. This was originally flagged back in the November annual plan workshop that there would likely be an increase in funding requests coming through this process, and this is effectively the result of that. CDMG did also agree that the fund should be reviewed ahead of the next long-term plan, because this is the first time we've implemented it, and so then this would complete the funding for the next 2 years with a review leading into the next long-term plan.
Thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Crosby.
Point of clarification with the Toronto City coming up with the resources for Surf Life Saving New Zealand and Toronto-based services. Can you explain how that's worked? I've read it a couple of times, but I'm not quite sure about the reserving, and why haven't you used that reserving instead of asking for another 51,000?
Right, so the reserving, so the current financial year was around about 300,000 allocated through this year, so that left 100,000 in reserve. CDMG took the view to allocate that amount in reserve over the next 2 years as well, so the amount being allocated actually allocated each year is going to be 450,000 each year. So that reserve is fully used up as well. Then the additional is a $50,000 a year increase on that.
Mr. Von Wilson.
Yeah, it just concerns me a little bit that we're getting an ask ad hoc to increase it at this stage in the cycle. When you look at it in the merit of an individual ask, and we'll take Coast Guard as an example, they asked for 100,000, we only gave them 20. And yet the Rotorua Mountain Bike Club asked for 80 and got 80. I'm not, you know, that decision has been made internally, no doubt. But to me, you know, I don't want to see us doing add-ons because we have to be prudent. We have to actually live within our budgets. And if we haven't got it right, then we need to make sure next time round we have. But with the decision we made, I'm one that believes that while it might be merited, because it looks like to me that the allocation you gave to Coast Guard as an example, but if that's the decision that's been made, what's the rationale and why are you now coming to us and saying let's increase it? Not increase it, but more than double it. So that's my concern. I don't want to be going through the annual plan thing and getting to this stage and having to rejig budgets like that. So was there a huge error earlier on, or how did you arrive at such an inequitable, what looks like to me an equitable distribution in the first place, knowing that you only have limited funds?
So whilst staff are thinking about that, Councillor Donaldson, could I ask Councillor Love, because I think the answer to that question is simply CDM Joint Committee have come back with a recommendation to be funded by the targeted rate. What was the rationale for that?
I don't remember it coming to the joint committee. I think it might have been down to the lower board, whatever we call it. It certainly wasn't discussed at the CDMG.
Mr. Allen.
Yes, so just to give a little bit of background to this, if that be useful. So you remember that we consulted on this RSRS fund through the long-term plan. Through that process, Council requested we look at CDMG as the vehicle for effectively being the government body for the funding process. We had a funding round in February. It was considered through a subcommittee of CDMG, which included representatives from the various councils, plus a number of the likes of St John's and the fire service in there. Then a report came through to CDMG in March, which the key committee provided those recommendations to CDMG. It was quite a short item in terms of CDMG, but you said that went through that process. And the allocation, CDMG view was to make the allocations of the funding that was available, and then basically if there was, I suppose to test council's appetite, or to say that if there was funding available, these were the areas where they would recommend additional funding would go to these organisations. So as you would normally expect with these funding applications, quite a much larger amount of fund was applied for by organisations, and then each of the applications was assessed through the KEC subcommittee and then through recommendations to the joint committee, and then the additional amount coming through the annual plan process.
And the funding is by way of an increase in the targeted rate, right?
Correct.
Which was 30 cents or?
On average about 30 cents. Yeah.
Cents. Mr. Brunning and Mr. Clark.
You mentioned YSAR, did you?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, just a side comment, YSAR is youth search and rescue, and it trains up young people. And I have a granddaughter that's been through it. It's been an excellent program. But there is no connection between YSAR and SAR. So I have some reservations.
Thank you, Councillor Brunning. Councillor Clark, I hope that Mr. Love has noted that comment. I can't remember the submission when they came, but I'm sure we asked that question.
Now.
Well, Mr. Clark.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in my case, I can remember all these items here being quite vigorously debated and agreed upon some time ago, and we agreed what was fair and equitable, and I'm probably all set to maintain the status quo. I do know it's only a small increase, but I mean, we do make our decisions based on the best evidence at the time, and it's proposing that we stick with the existing budgets. Sure.
Councillor Neese.
I'm like like Councillor Crosby, I'm a little bit confused about the Tauranga City Council issue. Were the Tauranga City ratepayers levied for this rate?
Yes, the Tauranga rate does include all councils across the region.
Right, so, but Tauranga City Council also obviously levied them through their general rate or whatever it is. So they were technically paying twice, but they're not getting any benefit through the regional safety and rescue rate. And that just feels a bit inequitable. I thought that the money was going to be sort of spread across the region proportionately. So I have some real concerns about where we've ended up just on a municipality position. I have got some sympathy with Councillor Clark. While it may seem just an extra 40 cents, it's very easy to add more money into the pot. And in particular, I do feel that the system is a bit imperfect, and I think it would be sensible to let it shake down for a year or so. I don't think it's fair that the Tauranga ratepayers are being rated for something that they're getting minimal benefit out of.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Neese. Are staff able to tell us across the region, are other councillors doing what Tauranga TCC does in terms of supporting their respective local, in this instance, life-saving community?
So in relation to the surf life-saving service, the Tauranga is the only one which is providing support outside RSRS. The other services that are being funded through RSRS are across the region. That was largely due to TCC having a contract already in place with Surf Life-Saving New Zealand, and they recently extended that towards the end of last year. We have been in conversations at staff level with TCC and Surf Life-Saving around what both funding options avenues are, and that's part of the view to look at when it comes through into the next long-term plan cycle. Effectively, what is the future of that fund at that point? Because Surf Life-Saving is a big component of the costs for services across the region.
You, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, if I could add a little bit of a comment, interesting twist of fate with regards in the Whakatane context. Traditionally, they provided $75,000 a year from the Harbour Board Fund to support the Surf Life-Saving and over in the Hopi context, because this 75,000 is actually being picked up by this account here. That 75,000 has been made available to water using groups and has generated a considerable amount of value amongst the kayaks, the Wakarama clubs in Whakatane as a consequence of that money being available. So I think there's an interesting bit of context when we take a decision, other groups actually can get term benefits out of it. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Sarah, did you have something you wanted to add? No?
Well, thank you, Chair. Not really to add, just to reinforce that the $400,000 was agreed to through previous decisions by council, and that the decision was made for the allocation decision by the CDM group, given the expertise around the table, particularly with fire emergency, Johns and the police. So Joint Committee took those recommendations from the group that was allocated to determine that. And I think what we're seeing here is the recommendations are captured by the envelope. This is where they're recommending the funding go. But if there was an appetite to increase by an additional $50,000 per year, they saw real benefit in the Coast Guard, the land search and rescue, and the youth search and rescue bids. You'll recall that there was a specific criteria that this council approved when it agreed to the RSRS funding mechanism.
Excuse me, Sarah, we can't hear you very well. Do you mind could you repeat the key parts of that? Just struggling to hear you here.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
It's much better, thank you.
Okay. The criteria that the panel did determine those funding splits was agreed by this council when it approved the RSRS funding mechanism to the $400,000 envelope, $400,000 envelope. And that criteria was used by the panel, and they've made these recommendations here. And they've said, given the $400,000, here's their recommendation. But if there was an additional $50,000, they really did see merit in the Coast Guard land search and rescue and youth search and rescue bids that were put forward. So, what they have recommended is with the $400,000, this is what should be funded. But if there was an additional $50,000, these other additional benefits would be received.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Councillor Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I owe an apology to the council, actually. It was discussed at that meeting. I remember it now. I've just looked it up on the table. And I remember making a comment at the time. It's a time when I have a split personality being the chair of risk and assurance and the chair of CDMG, and taking away one hand and giving me the other. And so I remember saying at the time, I feel that I have to let it go forward, but this is obviously a decision then for each council to make to whether or not they actually meet this additional request.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, councillors. So clearly, the choices in front of you are to include the extra $51,000 or leave it as it is, which Sarah says is $400,000.
Yep.
Is that right, Sarah? So it's a simple choice. You either want to include another 50,000 as recommended by CDM. We don't. Can you give me a consensus?
Can I abstain from this one, please?
Yeah, fine. Andrew?
I vote against it.
Okay.
I think they can come back next year and look at it. We've gone through the process, and I think the timing is wrong for us to start bumping it up from here. Yes, but no matter how much we give them, more would always be nice.
Okay, councillors, I've got an indication from about 4 councillors that you'd rather stick with the status quo. Is anyone who's violently opposed and would like to recommend or move a motion that we accept option 1? Okay, no motions. No, so it's option 2. Stick with the 400,000. Everyone agree? Right, thank you. Next one, sustainable home loans. Can you just, okay, you've covered off in the first one.
The next 2 items are information only, and they relate to the Sustainable Home Program. As noted in the paper, there's a delay due to CCCFA requirements, and we'll be seeking direction via a report, and then the Tauranga CBD temporary bus interchange, where additional costs to maintain the service levels, basically because of what's going on in town, the buses have to rest in different locations, which creates additional operating costs, and that staff are proposing funding via reprioritisation. So there's no specific request for funding as part of or guidance on funding today, but rather to provide information for any discussion that councillors might wish to have prior to these potentially being discussed at deliberations or at a later point.
So can you help us? 3rd of May is not far away. You're expecting the CCFA requirements to be determined by then?
Through the chair, tēnā koutou councillors. We are in discussion since you'll recall, and we have got a paper coming to Strategy and Policy Committee in the confidential section on the 3rd of May on this specific topic. But you'll recall we sent a request for a waiver to Minister Clark back in October last year, and we were seeking that waiver to ensure that we were exempt from the Credit Contracts and Consumer Financing Act components. Since then, we've had 3 meetings with NBIE to work through what the options are to move that forward, and to also seek greater clarity on the requirements. At this point in time, we can't convert. We are still working through that. So we have got a separate paper in the confidential component of the Strategy and Policy Committee to talk through and seek your direction as to what you want to do in relation to this, and depending on your direction, that may have implications on the annual plan, which will then come back to the May deliberations meeting with.
Thank you, Councillor Browning.
So is this a fixed cost, or is it subject to negotiations you're having over the level of service by the bus company?
We're just referring to the first one, sustainable home loans.
Right.
That's right. Okay, wait till strategy and policy. Is there a drop dead date in which this has to be concluded, which will be the adoption of the annual plan?
Through the chair will be the adoption of the annual plan.
What date's that?
29th, 30th of June this year.
Okay, thank you. Next one. Can I ask the Chief Executive to introduce this, because this has been an issue we've been talking about for weeks. And it's probably it's not palatable in terms of both, I think, the process and where we see ourselves as a regional council.
Thank you, Chair. As you're aware, there is going to be the civic centre is being demolished to make way for a new civic centre in Tauranga, and part of that requires a temporary movement of the CBD interchange from Willow Street to Durham Street. Staff have been working, that was notified to the Regional Council in December last year, and we've been working in terms of finding a solution for the community and our bus customers in particular in regards to that temporary interchange. Clearly, with all of the other additional factor here is there is a number of roadworks and changes happening throughout Tauranga, which means that the buses, how they get into the CBD and out of the CBD will have to change. We're currently working with New Zealand Bus, and it is a negotiation at the moment, but our best estimate today is it'll be additional cost of $243,000 with that move to that temporary interchange. That is based on more travel time that the buses have to take. One of the key factors with the temporary bus interchange is it's actually smaller than the existing one. So buses cannot stay there, or layover is the term, they have to go somewhere else. The other issue that we face is that bus drivers do need to take breaks. They need to have facilities where it allows them to have bathrooms and such like. They will have to move the buses to get those sorts of facilities, hence this cost. This is a cost that we will be seeking to fund through reprioritisation as we are still negotiating it. We hope by the 17th of May we'll be able to confirm the figure for you, but it is not going to be passed on through a targeted rate.
So Fiona, would you like to also comment on, following our discussions the other day, I'm not convinced that this amount of funding will satisfy the integrated approach to address not only the bus contract, but also the customer safety aspects that we discussed with the police department, and who pays for that in terms of a fit for purpose CCTV system. Is it them or us? Because that's got to be resolved.
So councillors, you are aware that for an effective public transport system, there are many agencies involved. So the chair is referring to the role of the Tauranga City Council in terms of providing security cameras and such like, and the environment around the CBD interchange. In our current model, TCC funds the interchange and all of the amenities within it. Yesterday, the chair and I attended a meeting with the police, TCC and Allied Security in regards to the security issues at Willow Street. At that meeting, the police talked about the necessity to have a very good security systems at the bus interchange to ensure the safety of the community. At that meeting, it was mentioned that TCC are aware of these security concerns and seeking to address those at that temporary interchange. This is something that is clearly important to all of the agencies because of the safety of not only the bus, the people who use the bus, but also the drivers and the community at large. We can provide an update to you as those plans are firmer in terms of exactly what is going to happen in terms of this temporary interchange in regards to security and mobility issues.
Councillor Thurston?
Yeah, I'm pleased the CEO wove the issue of those with mobility issues into her comments. But, you know, I'm more than anyone around here more aware of the paramount need to address safety issues down there and also the financial impact on ratepayers and building this facility, which I don't think will be short term at all. My gut feeling is it's going to be there for some long period of time. But once again, I seek assurance on behalf of, dare I say, my sector, in terms of the physical challenges to consumers who are also ratepayers, and 1 in 5 of the individuals here in Tauranga in terms of access. It is critical, and I just hope that's paramount and at the forefront of all our negotiations going forward with our joint committee that we have and with our discussions with the commissioners.
Thank you, Councillor Thurston. And yes, there is a paper and a briefing going to the Tauranga PT committee. To be very clear, though, that it is TCC's responsibility in terms of those mobility issues. The Regional Council have provided advice, but ultimately they determine what is appropriate in terms of the wider city. And that is what they are doing, and that advice and the final solutions will be going to that Tauranga PT committee.
So just to recapture, Fiona, the recommendation here is the sum of money will be accrued by way of reprioritisation. That's one of our options, right? And the issues we're talking about in terms of a fit for purpose, temporary, in inverted commas, interchange, has not been and is not accommodated in this figure, right?
Yes, that's correct. For this year, we were working with a long-term plan that had reserve funding for implementing more bus services in Tauranga and the Western Bay. You recall it was the TSB medium scenario. Given what has happened with Omicron, we're currently running that weekend service, and we expect to run that weekend service for at least until July, and we'll be reviewing it. So we're in a situation where, because of a lack of bus drivers, we're not able to run the full service. And so we're looking at what we can do this year, because we can't see that that's not going to be an issue for the year. Until New Zealand can get more bus drivers to come here, we like Hamilton and Auckland and Wellington and Christchurch have a shortage of bus drivers. So given that there was reserve funding available, we're now going to bring you a paper in your May deliberations in regards to reallocating some of that reserve funding towards these unexpected additional costs with the move of the bus interchange.
Right, councillors, you clear on what the proposal is? Mr. Love.
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask exactly what reprioritisation means, please?
So you do have money in reserves for additional bus services in the Western Bay, and what we are looking at now is using some of that funding for this additional cost, as well as the on-demand trial that you are also looking to bring in next year.
So effectively what you're saying, this is at no additional cost?
There will be no additional increase in targeted rates, but you have allocated reserve funding to improve transport in the Western Bay, and that funding will be used for this additional cost and potentially that on-demand trial as well.
But also this is, if I heard you right, this is a reduced level of service as well,
Yes,
which
we're
will
currently.
continue for the rest of the
That's correct. We're currently running a reduced level of service that started at Omicron, and it's continuing because of our workforce issue. We are looking, and we're currently in negotiations with NZ Bus about that reduced service. We are looking where there have been people who are very concerned about this weekend service, that they're not able to get to work, for example, particularly in the morning. We are looking at introducing additional services in terms of where we know there is demand, and so we're currently looking at that. So for the foreseeable future, we'll be running that weekend service for the next 3 months, but we're also negotiating in terms of where we do see there is additional services required, and it's particularly to get people to and from work. Because that weekend service in particular, the early morning and the late at night services aren't running. And some people actually, really wanting to use those buses to get to work. But the level of service that will be provided in 22-23 will be less than what we planned for when we did this annual plan.
Thank you, Councillor Crosby, Brunning, and then Von Duddleston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support the reprioritisation. I think we're in a very challenging position at the moment. What's hard to see, though, is a clear future for that interchange. And I support Councillor Thurston. This is not going to be a 3-year temporary solution. It'll probably be like stage 2 of Bay Court 32 years ago, but it's going to be a long-term one. I've seen nothing coming out of TCC that indicates a preferred solution for that new hub. So I hope they're working on it. So there might be a little ray of hope with Waka Kotahi as well. And the only worry I do have is that, this was money, as you said, reserved for something else, particularly higher levels of service. And when they do come back on stream, when we get back to a sense of normality, we're still going to have this annual cost. So look, it's a difficult situation, but I do support at least this year reprioritising it from existing budgets. I think it's a sensible solution.
Thank you, Councillor Brunning.
Am I correct that the balance at the forecast for the end of the financial year for Tauranga Bus is a deficit of $1 million?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that's related to the targeted rate balance. When Fiona was talking about reserve balance, that was the TSP reserve balance that we were using, which is out the regional reserve. So I think the deficit that you're talking about is the Tauranga passenger transport deficit. I don't think it's as high as $1 million. Yeah, less than $1 million that we're forecasting towards the end of the year now. Part of which is due to the saving. There is a partial saving due to the weekend service we're currently running, but the TSP savings on reserves is funded out of the regional reserve. So that's why that funding is available.
You're clear, Mr. Brunning. So I think that's a reflection of less patronage. Would it be? The revenue side?
Yes, I mean, we haven't had the patronage that we were planning on because of Omicron. So we're still working with Waka Kotahi in terms of what they will fund. You'll recall that we are on half price fares at the moment. So it is an area that we're still negotiating with the NZ Bus, and also being keen to be clear with Waka Kotahi what they will fund. The other big factor in this year is that we have done that refresh, and that resulted in savings. We are looking at doing another refresh next year. It's very clear that for this city, we need to be continually looking at what is required by our customers and adapting to what is required. It will be over the next 2 or 3 years, you could see that public transport in Western Bay absolutely needs to increase, and it's how it's increased and just sort of the timing of that and adapting to the demand that people are seeking from the bus service.
Councillor Von Duddleston.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, in principle, I agree with the concept of reprioritisation. I think we have to be pragmatic. We don't have enough answers right now to make to be asking our councillors a definitive decision on this. But I think by the time we get to I think it's 17th of May, hopefully we will have a much more clarity that we can actually come to this with a definitive answer. But I think it would be unfair to our councillors to actually ask them in principle, I think reprioritisation means no extra budget, and we don't want to see an extra budget item. But to get a definitive answer, I think we need more clarification. So I ask that you don't actually seek a definitive answer on this until we get close to May, where we can actually have better information to base the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Von Daddelson. That's exactly what staff have been asked. So I've heard you've heard the commentary today, Siobhan. And we'll have a final proposal or recommendation on the 18th of May. But in the meantime, I think between Councillor Von Daddelson and Councillor Thompson, I see you've got your hand up, Councillor Thompson. I think between the two of you, you've got some work to do at that Public Transport Committee running with the commissioners in the wider issue, not just this funding on the contractual basis, but the wider provision of you heard the discussion yesterday, Andrew, in terms of a comprehensive approach to fit for service and hopefully best practice in terms of some of these interchanges. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, a lovely segue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My request is that could I have 5 minutes after this meeting has closed, just to have a discussion on the 3 o'clock meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, the workshop has concluded.